All right, we are back looking at our functions web page here. And remember, our HTML is pretty simple. We're just tying in our JavaScript. So I'm going to jump over to our JavaScript here. And I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit more about functions to clarify a few things. First of all, one of the things we're going to talk about with functions is the idea of parameters. You'll also hear them referred to as arguments. We're going to talk about return values again. And we're going to talk about scope. So if you remember from last time, if we want to write a function in JavaScript, we write function, and then we give our function a name. In this case, let's have our function have the name print this number. Okay. And that's a basic function. And the two parts I'm not mentioning, but we've talked about before, we have these parentheses here. That's eventually where our parameters or arguments are going to go. We also have these squiggly brackets that define our code block. So for now, let's just console.log inside here, and we'll have this. This is our number. Do a little string interpolation here, and we'll have it print out the number 6. Let's go ahead and save this and run it and see what happens. See, based on our previous conversations, if you can guess what's going to happen. Nothing. Nothing happens because we didn't call our function. Remember, declaring a function like this is just naming the code block, but not actually calling the code block. Okay, so let's write print this number. And let's refresh and see what happens. Nothing. Why nothing this time? Well, we're simply restating the name of our function. We're not yet calling it. To call it, you need to put the parentheses at the end, and that indicates that you want to call it. One more time, take a second and see if you can guess the result, and I'll go ahead and refresh the page. There we have our function. So this is the most basic, right, version of a function. We have a function that we've named, that we've put in a very simple instruction inside of our code block, and then we've called our function. Really simple version of a function. Let's start with our first part of our conversation, though, and that's parameters and arguments. They mean and refer to the same thing, and what they are values that we can hand our function to work with. So let's make a variable. Let number equal 6, or oops. Back. We'll call this our number, a little bit better. Variable naming, let our number equal 6. We can come in here and we can ask it to print our number. Now, I have not put anything in our parameters or our arguments here. I've just labeled a variable and asked our function to print that variable inside of here. Let's see what happens. Same result, right? And if we change this to 7, we're still getting our number printed out from out here. That has to do with the scope of this variable, which I'll talk about in a second. But first, I want to talk about parameters. So if we wanted this function to work with this number in a more predictable manner, what we might do is say, give it some parameter called some number. And inside of here, instead of having it print our number, which has global scope, we're going to have it print some number, which is the parameter passed in here. Now watch when I try to run this, what happens. This is our number undefined. We are not passing in a parameter here. So when we do this string interpolation, it's trying to print what is here, which because we're not passing in a parameter, this is undefined. So that's why we're getting this is our number undefined, right? This is not defined. We could instead pass something in here. We could pass in a number. we'll get 5. We could pass in another number, we'll get 200, right? We could pass in any number and have it print out. We actually haven't said this has to be a number, right? We could pass in a string too, and it would still function because JavaScript doesn't actually care what type this is and it's going to try to do it anyway, no matter what type you're passing in here, as long as it can do it. It even tried to do it with something that was undefined totally, right? So that little string interpolation will take anything and do its best to work with it. But we can pass in numbers, we can pass in strings, we can even pass in variables. We can pass in our number if we want. And we get this to print 7. So to clarify what's happening, we're storing the number 7 in our variable here. We are then taking that variable and passing it to this function. This function is accepting that variable, calling it some number, and then logging that variable along with this is our number in this sentence here. So storing it as a variable, passing that variable to our function. Our function is storing that variable inside of this variable, some number, and then using some number inside of here. If we were then try to do, let's say, console.log some number, right? Trying to log this variable here, let's see what happens. We run into an issue. We actually have an error here. And it's saying that this is undefined. Oh, actually, nope. This is the error here. Let's rerun this. Okay, now it's saying this is undefined. But I'm using it here, so why is it undefined here? Well, this goes to our third issue of scope. Variables have different scopes, and scopes are the context that we're allowed to access that variable and use that variable. It's where those variables are available. A way that to think about it is if your program is a house or a building of some sort, and every function is a room, sometimes variables are available everywhere in the house, like our number. But sometimes variables are only available in a given room, like some number. To show this more clearly, we could actually define a variable other than some number inside of here. Let's say let function scope variable equal 10. And here we can say we're going to print function scope variable. We'll cease to take any input in right now. That's fine. We don't need any parameters for this. But what I do want to see is what happens when I try to do console.log function scope variable outside of our function. So this variable, and by the way, remembering that variable is available everywhere, inside and outside the house. Inside and outside the room, I mean, anywhere in the house, right? So let's see if we can predict what's going to happen in each one of these cases. We're going to move through our code. The first thing that's going to happen is this function is going to get called. The next thing that's going to happen is we're going to log our number to the console. And the last thing, we're going to try to log function scope variable to the console. Okay. This function is called. We log 7. We log 10. This is our number 10 to the console. Good. We log our number 7 to the console. Fine. We come down here. We log our number 7 to the console. Fine. But then we try to log function scope variable to the console, and we get an error that it's not defined because the scope of this variable here, scope of this variable is limited to this function, right? that variable is not accessible outside of this function. I can actually put this above the variable. Okay, that variable is limited to inside the function. This variable, the scope of this variable is global to this file, at least, right? Now, if I were trying to access this variable outside of this file, say in another JavaScript file, I wouldn't be able to get access to it, right? It is limited in scope to this file, but within this file, it has a global scope. Everything in this file can gain access to it. Something else that's interesting is that when we pass in parameters, we can edit them inside of our function, and we can affect global variables. So let's say take some number in again. This time, we're going to do some math with some number. Let's say some number plus equals 1. And let's print some number. Let's log our number. And then let's come out here and log our number. And let's see what happens. So we have our number. We need to call our function. So see if you can predict what's going to happen. We have our number. We're going to pass it in here. We're going to add, this by the way is an incrementer operation. It just means add 1. It's the same as if I said some number equals some number plus 1, right? This and this are the same thing. Okay. All right, see if you can predict what's going to happen. We get, this is our number 1. Interesting. Okay. Plus, it should be plus equals. There we go. Sorry. Let me go back. Okay. This is our number 8, 7, 7. So we pass the number 7 into this function. We add 1 to it. We print out what happens when we add 1 to it. But then when we print out our number, we're still getting 7. Now, if we had done this instead, we're going to get 7 that's passed in, but then we're going to get 8, and we're going to continue to get 8. So here we are affecting the global variable, changing it, and some number is only gets changed locally. So if we make a change to some number, even though we're passing in our number, some number is only going to get changed within this local scope. Our number, on the other hand, is going to get changed on the global scope if we change it within this function. This kind of change is often referred to as a side effect. And not necessarily something you always want to do in your code, because when you have a side effect inside of a function, meaning a function with local scope affecting something with a higher global scope, it can result in not being able to track down where errors are happening. You want your functions to kind of affect only what's in their function. Which actually brings me to the last issue of, if we're only going to affect things that are happening in here, how do our functions start having effects on the broader program? Well, that's where return values come in. Okay. And then we can say, I'm going to just get this all set up and then I'll walk through it with you. Okay. So now this is no longer a side effect. This is a local scope change, right? It's not a side effect. It's not affecting the global number. So the question I want to know is, do we expect this to be a 7 or an 8 if we're not affecting it globally anymore? Let's find out. It's an 8. Why is it an 8? Because print this number is actually not just printing this number, it's actually increase this number by 1 is what is actually happening now, right? So let's change the name of our function here. This is now increase this number by 1. And when it's done increasing by 1, it shows us that some number increased by 1 is, and then it returns that value, stores that value again inside of the variable our number. So this is a much cleaner process that we want for our functions, generally speaking. We want a function to take any information in it that it needs, manipulate that information, and then return that information back to our program in a very predictable way. Side effects, like I was showing you earlier on a global variable, just aren't very predictive and therefore aren't very good for our code. Okay, so one last thing I want to show you and one last point I want to make. Let's assume for a moment we wanted to make a program that did a few different things. Let's say we wanted to figure out how many years from now we would be 1,000 in dog years. Okay, let's say we wanted to figure that out. The first thing we might want to do is, so let's write out sort of pseudocode comments about what we would need to do. We need to get the user's age. We need to convert that age into dog years. We need to find the number of dog years between our current dog year age and 1,000. And this might not be the cleanest this might not be the cleanest way of doing this, but I want to show you a point, and then I want to convert from dog years back to human years. Now, I think we're aware that times 7 is actually not a proper conversion, but let's, for the moment, pretend that's what we were doing, right? Okay. How do we get a number from our user? We know how to do that. So we'll say let user's age equal, and by the way, here is a function that's already been written for us. Actually, with prompt, we probably don't need that. Okay. So we ask the user how old they are. And by the way, we know we're going to want this as a number. So let's go ahead and cast it as a number right off the bat. Okay. How old are you? Now, so that takes care of this line. This line's done. Now let's go down to our next line. Let's convert that age into dog years. So to do this, let's write a function. And it's going to take an age. It is going to return, and return values don't have to just be variables. You can return a whole statement. So in this case, we're going to say return age times 7. Okay, there's a function. Now we're going to want to find the number of dog years between our current dog year's age and 1,000. So let's write another function. Dog years until 1000. This is also going to take a dog years age, right? And all we're going to do is return 1000 minus dog years age. Finally, we need one more function that's going to convert back into human years. So we're going to say convert into human years. We'll take a dog years variable and we'll return that variable. So here we should just think about the math carefully because I guess there's a chance it's not going to divide nicely by 7. If that's the case, we probably want to do some like, let's see, does it make more sense to round up or round down? Well, actually, we can do a decimal. Decimal's fine. Yeah, we'll do a decimal. That's fine. We're going to take dog years and divide by 7. So I want you to see how nicely each one of these functions matches up with a step in our program, but we haven't actually done anything yet. So we kind of need to get our whole program together. So to do our whole program, what we're going to do is we're going to have one more function, and we're going to call that like main program. It's not going to take any... Oh, I guess it should... Let's go ahead and have it take the original age. And then this will be the running program that sort of keeps track of everything and reports back to the user at the end. So the first thing we know we want to do is convert into dog years, and we'll pass it age. And we know that's going to return us a value, right? It's going to return us this. So we'll call this dog age equals, and we'll do a little... I should have done a let there, right? Then we're going to say let years until equal dog years until 1000, and we'll pass it our dog age. Finally, we want to convert that back into human years. So we'll say let human years equal convert into human years our years until. Finally, we want to report back to the user what we found out. So we'll do console .log, and we'll give them a little statement. It will be passing in human years until you are 1000 in dog years. Nice. Now we have a program. We have all these nice functions. They pass information to each other. Notice we are calling functions from inside of functions. Let's go ahead and run it and see how good it is. How old are you? I am 41. Nothing. Why nothing? Well, we forgot to actually call our main program. And in fact, what we probably should do to do this really right, we should take this out of our outside of our program and link it inside of our program here. Our main loop then won't take a parameter. That's weird. These aren't lined up properly. Our main loop, our main program here won't take a parameter, and we will just pass in user's age here, which we define up here, right? So user's age. That's probably a little bit cleaner. Keeps everything really limited in scope. We're not going to have any side effects from these functions, right? They're not affecting anything other than the information we pass them and only passing information back. Really clean. And then we just have to remember to call main program. Now, when we run it, I tell it I am 41, and it says it will be 101.857 until you are 1,000 in dog years. You know what? Thinking back about that, I think we do want to maybe clean this up a little bit. There is a library we can access called math, and inside of it we can use some functions, including a function called floor, which will just round down. Actually, let's not call floor. Let's call seal, which is short for ceiling, and that'll round up for us. So theoretically, we should see 102 here, but let's give it a run and find out. I am 41. It'll be 102 years. I should say years. It'll be 102 years until I am 1,000 in dog years, right? And that's our program. The other thing I want to point out about this program is notice I don't do more than one thing in any function except main program. Our main program loop is the only function where I'm doing more than one thing. Every other little task is being divvied out to some other function. Asking for a number is being divvied out to prompt. Converting to dog years is being sent to that function. Dog years until 1,000 is that function. Generally, you want your functions to do really one thing. And if you find you're having functions do more than one thing, it's probably time to write another function. And that way, it's really clear what is happening where and what changes we need to make. For example, if I wanted to change the way that dog years was being calculated, I know the two places I need to go to do it. Boom and boom. Right there and there. Okay. We've only had parameters. We've only had our functions take one parameter. Functions can take more than one parameter. Like we could say we want a conversion rate passed into this function and to this function. Conversion is looking weird to me now. I gotta type it and figure it out. Okay, no, that's right. All right. And that means that in here, we can, instead of doing 7, we can now use whatever conversion rate we want. And maybe that's something we decide we want to set up here, right? So let conversion rate equal 7.5 or something. And then in each one of these, we pass this new variable we've just defined as conversion rate out here, right? And that allows us to augment how our program runs by changing the information in one place. Now it only takes 93 years, right? And all I have to do is change the information right here. I can make my conversion rate 10. When I do that, my whole program adjusts to that because I've passed in this other attribute, other parameter, or argument. And those are just done in order, right? So user's age gets passed into the first one, conversion rate gets passed into the second one. That's how it knows which one goes in where. Okay, your skills check. Here's what I'd like you to do. Come up with a similarly complex kind of situation where you want to do 3 things to some information and write 4 functions, 3 functions to do those 3 things, and then a main program that's going to tie everything together. So that's your task for your skills challenge, 4 functions, and it should be different than the one I just did. Come up with your own 4 functions, 3 to do in individual tasks, and 1 to tie everything together. All right, good luck.